Russell Ball, and we're in Lynchburg, Virginia, in September 2010. We came to Lynchburg in 1955. I was hired by Babcock and Wilcox. I'm a nuclear physicist and worked in the critical experiment laboratory, designing and building nuclear devices, reactors mostly, for years until I moved downtown to work in the engineering department. When we came to Lynchburg in 1955, it was September 15th, almost exactly 1955 to 2010, about 55 years. We found a quite segregated city. It had water fountains, especially for colored, special entrances in the movie theaters for colored, and so on. And it was quite different. We are from Chicago. Both my wife and I were born there, educated there, we married there. And so we had to adapt. And part of the adaptation was to find actually the Unitarian Church, which was a liberal church and very interested in desegregation. The church in the early 60s was one of the very few places where blacks and whites could meet together. And we had formed then what was called a Human Relations Council. And the council met in the church and discussed the problems of segregation and what could be done about it. At that time there were two newspapers in town, but owned by the Glass family principally. And Carter Glass Jr. was a strong segregationist. And when the schools were ordered integrated, he was in agreement that public schools could be shut down. And there were private schools that were created. And a lot of somewhat, we think now, strange things happened. The swimming pools were shut down. There were people who withdrew children from summer camps, for example. We had a camp for inner city children and others called Camp Kumbaya. And our children were going to Camp Kumbaya, but when the director, Bev Cosby, announced that blacks and whites are welcome to play together, swim together, and so on, a number of people withdrew their children from the camp. We did not, because we felt strongly that segregation was wrong and wanted our children to understand that blacks and whites could live and work together. The Human Relations Council was a great thorn in the side of the newspaper and the publisher, Carter Glass. And he was very critical of both the people who were part of that council and in particular the minister of the Unitarian Church at that time, Greta Crosby, and wrote, she would write letters to the editor, and he would always append a note afterward being very critical of her, saying that she was a party to left-wing causes and so on. Eventually, the newspaper became so rabid that a group of important townspeople, merchants and ministers and so on, and Bill Quillian got together and confronted the newspaper and other members of the Glass family, Mrs. Boatwright being the principal one, and they changed. Carter was removed as the publisher, and there was a general improvement in the whole feeling of the town, and we peacefully really integrated schools. We had 2 young black children who entered E.C. Glass, and it was a difficult time for them, but they managed to survive really quite well and have gone on to be outstanding citizens of Virginia. Our children were very accepting of integration, and we have been very accepting of it. The fact that we had the Civil Rights Movement, and we had civil rights laws passed during the Johnson administration, had an effect in Lynchburg too. One of the things that probably was unique about Lynchburg is that when we arrived in 1955, there was practically no middle class. We had many people who were very rich. It was said there were some 50 millionaires in the city area. And then we had a lot of people working for the shoe factory and the sock factory and the foundry, and they were being paid just around minimum wage. And the town was greatly benefited, I think, when 2 major corporations came. One was Babcock and Wilcox, who came in 1955, who I joined. And then 2 years later, General Electric came and put up a very large mobile radio and electronics operation. And they brought in, B&W brought in people from the north, from Ohio and other areas. General Electric brought in a lot of people from upper New York State, Schenectady and that area and so on. And this middle class was filled a gap in the town, and their view of segregation was quite different from the people who had lived here all their lives. And I think that helped move integration forward within Lynchburg. The growth of that middle class, I think, aided a growth in a middle class of the black population as well. And they became more professional people and teachers and so on. So they were more accepting. The neighborhoods were quite segregated too, and that changed, and now you find within the city a lot of neighborhoods that are mixed racially. Not, I say a lot, not a lot, but more certainly than there were in the 50s and 60s. The segregation moved, I think, gradually, but the improvement is enormous. You don't recognize it unless you had come into that period when there was real segregation. I mean, a railroad station that had 2 waiting rooms, one for white, one for colored. And as I said, the movie theaters and the fountains and everything else. That has all changed. That's all wiped away. In fact, we look back on it and we can hardly believe that it happened. There is always some racial tension, I think, because it takes a long time for a new generation to come along, for people to recognize that all human beings are worthy of full respect and love. So it will take time, but I see maybe more improvement than some people do. They may be closer to the problems still with integration, but what I've seen is really tremendous progress. We've had fairly strong political involvement too, and there are wards in the city that are majority black and other majority white, and they've always had an influence in getting people on city council. I mean, here we've had a mayor who was black, we've had city council members now for many years who are black, and I think other institutions, the schools, the university, the churches have been really pretty slow in integration. You know, if you, I think it was Martin Luther King who said, you know, Sunday is the most segregated day of the week because people are in black churches or white churches and very seldom together. I don't know the reason for that, but it's a question, I guess, of wanting to be together socially. Incidentally, you might look at the book that was written by one of the high school students who were the first of the first two that integrated. And there's a book by a young girl who was a Unitarian, a member of our first Unitarian church here. Family came with GE. She moved up north in the Boston area and has become a Quaker, but she wrote a book, a very interesting book about the integration of the schools and their problems and how things have changed. I'm trying to think of her name. I've got
was the book's name something like On the Way, or
is it what?
On the Way, or some name like that? She came and talked to in the Unitarian University.
Pat
Pat
Wild,
yes,
W-I-L-D.
yeah.
And her parents came with General Electric.
Yes.
And they were members, important parts of the First Unitarian Church here. And she had written a book. Her name is also Pat Wild, as her mother's. And her book is very interesting. She was here promoting the book last year, and we had her at the church, and she gave a talk to a group there. Anyway, the schools are probably the leading edge for integration. They have done a lot. Our school superintendent now is a black. We have, I think, come a very, very long way. The industry has changed. I said when we came, they had these low-paying job industries, the foundry and the shoe factory. Well, the shoe business disappeared. You know, it all went overseas, and the Craddock Terry company that was here, essentially it was dissolved. The knitting mill that made socks and so on closed down shortly after we got here. That's gone. The foundry is essentially gone. The meat board plant, all of those, I would say, hard manufacturing firms have closed. But the middle class companies, a lot of them have stayed. Babcock and Wilcox stayed. They sold, well, they were absorbed by the McDermott Corporation, and then they McDermott sold off large chunks of Babcock and Wilcox, and one of the chunks was the commercial nuclear business, which they sold first, it was to Framatome, a French company, and then they sold just half of it, and then shortly thereafter they sold the second half. And so now we have two important nuclear companies in Lynchburg, Babcock and Wilcox, and the other company's now named Arriva, and both of them are involved in nuclear power, in the military production of power plants, and employ thousands of people, and probably are supporters or employers of the middle class, and sort of maintain the middle structure. Now General Electric sort of got out of that business. They spun off to Ericsson and then some other, Harris now. And one of the results of that has been the creation of a lot of spin-off small companies. We have in Lynchburg now dozens and dozens of companies that have maybe 5 to 100 people that are located in areas around the town, and they are, hiring, maintaining employment at a reasonable level in Lynchburg, even in these pretty hard times. The commercial businesses have changed. When we came, the central shopping area was downtown, and you had major department stores down there. You had Leggett's, Milner, and then Miller and Rhodes, Schules. All of those, except Schules, has stayed downtown, have essentially moved out to shopping malls or outlying areas. And the town expanded out, is still expanding out in that direction. And so we see just a greater extended population. The state decided not to allow annexation anymore. That has probably a mixed blessing, because an awful lot of the services provided in the city are taken advantage of by people who live outside the city and do not pay, their share of the city taxes. But we're still expanding. You go out on the 221 corridor, for example, it's just amazing the number of factories and stores and shops and so on that have been built there. I can't think much more about segregation.
Mr. Paul, would you like to talk about what you think about the current situation on the planet?
Well, people are still concerned about the lack of full integration, and committees have formed and discussion groups and so on to try and improve that. What I've seen of that is it seems that they are making more progress than they have. There is always some opposition from people who prefer the old ways, but I see continuing progress really in the city. In fact, I'm very impressed that the downtown area is having a renaissance, and Main Street is looking better than it has for many, many years. And we are developing sort of an artistic sense in a lot of ways. We have these little theaters that are all over. We have the Arts Council. We have galleries. There's the First Friday, the City Market. All of these are community interactions that I think strengthen the city and strengthen the community of people, black, white, rich, poor, all kinds. It's a very diverse community. It's a very good place to live, partly because of the people, which I appreciate, but you know, in nature we have done extremely well. We're fortunate here to be next to, on the back of our property, the Blackwater Creek bike path. And this is a marvelous thing. You would not believe that the number of people who are walking on a Saturday morning. There's so many cars at the Ed Page entrance there, they can't find a place to park. I'm lucky I don't have to find a place to park. I just walk down in the back here, and I'm on the bike path. And if you can continue on down the hill in another path, and you come to Blackwater Creek. When we were here, first here in the late 50s, Blackwater Creek was a semi-sewer, and it sometimes smelled bad. The water was polluted. There has been this interceptor project and a number of other projects that have improved that. There are now fish in the stream. A fellow who works for us fishes down at the Hollands Mill Dam. It's a catch and release, but he has a wonderful time. And this bike path is just filled with people every nice day. The other recreation areas in the city are also good, and of course integrated. Riverside Park now has a big splash fountain. There are places, there are a number of parks. Lynchburg has done very well in creating recreation, in establishing areas. We have a wonderful park system. And we have, as part of that park system, a recreational program that I go to a discussion group for seniors over at the Templeton Center. And we have very lively discussions on current events. But it's sponsored by the Recreation Department. And it's an example, I think, of Lynchburg helping create community among its people.
It's fantastic. It's a nice place to live.
It is a nice place to live. People come here from all over. A lot come down from Washington. People who are almost retirement age or actual retirees and have moved here. We have on our block here people who have moved down from Washington and love it. We are also blessed, thinking of the college level, university level school system. The Liberty University, while they do a lot of things that I'm not real enthused about, they have increased that upper middle class population, both of students and faculty. Randolph College, which was Randolph-Macon, has always had outstanding faculty and contributed a lot to the intellectual life of the city. Lynchburg College is really quite remarkable in its educational programs. It's now a fairly sizable school, over 2,000, I think, and a very good campus, and I've been in classes there. But all of the schools have programs of culture, both in art, theater, music, all of which are available to this population in general. That's an interesting point though about integration. I do notice that attendance at concerts or theater is quite often so predominantly white, not in proportion to the percentage of black population at all. It's much more a white enterprise, and that should be changed. I don't know how to improve on that. We don't have essentially a black school. We have a black school tradition. The old alumni of Dunbar School, for example, still feel very close together, and they're mostly a black population. But those cultural advantages of the city are really sort of remarkable for a city this size.
Do you remember anything about Dunbar? What happened to Dunbar?
Dunbar, well, it's named after a poet, Paul Laurence Dunbar. Dunbar was a black high school, and we had Glass, which is a white high school, and then when we desegregated, essentially they changed the system, and Dunbar is, I think, now a middle school, and is totally integrated. I've only been there a few times, but it's quite a good physical plant. It has several modern buildings that they've put up. It's situated in an area that is mostly black, but they bus children from all over the city to attend there. And we have a close by school here to Lincoln, also a middle school and grade school. And it's integrated. Busing was very controversial, and sort of one of the things that people got very up in arms about. But I think on balance, people recognize that busing has improved integration, or helped create integration. There are schools that, because of their location or whatever, are still mostly black, but I think the administration is trying to improve on that.
Yes. Mr. Ball, would you like to talk a little about the current world situation, what you think is happening, and where do you see us all going in the future?
You're saying the world situation?
Yeah.
Well,
like humanity.
Yeah, well, at the moment, as you know, we're about to have an election that's going to, I hope not, but I think may disappoint liberal people like myself. And I think the previous administration did us a great deal of harm, both with the creation of wars and the imposition of taxes. One of the other things that happened, I think, is that, and it's still happening, is that the people who are anti-government and would prefer to have free enterprise be in charge of everything have done a great deal of damage to government institutions, which, as we look around us, are absolutely necessary. I mean, if without intelligent regulation and the setting of rules for the financial and the technical community, manufacturing, geology, the oil drilling, the coal mining, all of those things are making use of the resources that really didn't belong to anybody originally. And the people who are exploiting them have to have rules so that they don't damage the rest of us. And a sad thing, I think, is that the previous administration was bent on weakening both regulation and the enforcement of rules, and it did a great deal of damage, and it's going to take a while to repair that, because the people that you put into a regulatory position, if they are not dedicated, intelligent, and so on, they can cause great damage. And we look at the mine explosions and problems, the oil spill problems in the Gulf, and we see that, you know, we have not paid sufficient attention to our resources and the protection of people. In our adventures overseas, I think, you know, there was great overstretch. I think it's recognized now that the Iraq War and probably the Afghan War were terrible tragedies, great mistakes. And getting ourselves extracted without doing more damage is proving to be very, very difficult. The idea that, well, I'll even wander off a little bit into nuclear weapons, and I'll talk a little bit about Iran. My view actually is that the Iranian nuclear program can be contained and controlled, and we do not have to force them to stop enrichment of uranium. They have created an enrichment facility. They have said they are enriching uranium to use in nuclear power. And they have behaved more or less as if they actually believe that and are following through on that. There's a lot of scare talk about the Iranians are so close to a nuclear weapon, and if they got a nuclear weapon, the entire Middle East would be terribly destabilized. And there are calls for bombing the facilities that are responsible for enrichment, even bombing a power reactor, the Bushware reactor that was provided by the Russians for power generation. Now, I think that's absolutely insane. The consequences of bombing Iran at all are just too awful to contemplate almost. And yet, the most recent issue of The Atlantic goes through all of the reasons that people are giving that by spring, of this coming spring, that there ought to be a bombing of the Iranian facilities. It's a terrible idea. I happen to be interested in medical isotopes. This is I consult with Babcock and Wilcox, and I work with the Argonne Laboratory in Chicago in research on medical isotopes. And interestingly enough, Iran has a research reactor which was given to them by the United States back when the Shah was in power. This research reactor is important for their medical isotope production. This research reactor will, in not too long a period, need more fuel. And there's this great controversy about who should supply the fuel. Should they have the fuel for this research reactor? And the answer would be yes, although what I would also like to do is consider providing Iran with a reactor that is designed to produce medical isotopes, which happens to be the project I'm working on here. I haven't gone to the State Department or anybody else with this idea, but I think we have to treat Iran with some more respect, and we cannot give so much credence to the almost fringe elements of Iran, and I think Ahmadinejad is a fringe element. And he says, well, I wanted to destroy Israel, or I don't believe in the Holocaust, and on and on. Well, we have people in this country who say very similar things, and while most of them are not in power, we don't consider them as dangerous as somehow we are now considering the Iranian government. Obama was making the right moves. Whether he will continue to be able to do that, I don't know, but I would hope so. And I was terribly depressed by reading this Atlantic series of articles on the possibility of bombing Iran, and that's Iran's possession of nuclear weapons is not the disaster that some people forecast, I don't think. I mean, we have a North Korea, Pakistan, and so on, very destabilizing elements that have nuclear weapons. But in spite of the forecasts for decades and decades that the danger of nuclear weapons about to push us into a war, no country has really done that, and many countries have just abandoned their nuclear weapons program altogether. Libya, Argentina, Brazil, all of these countries were on their way originally to create nuclear weapons, and they realized, the value of nuclear weapon in wartime is almost zero. In fact, our military generally recognizes that. It has no, you can scare people with it, but as an actual weapon to use in a conflict, it is almost worthless. That's my worldview at the moment.
Could you explain a little isotope? What isotope is?
Well, an isotope is a variation of one of the basic elements. There are naturally occurring about 92 elements, ranging from hydrogen to uranium, everything in between. Each of these elements usually has a slight variation, slightly different weight, and so those are called isotopes. And these isotopes, some of them are radioactive, and in the case of the medical isotopes that I'm interested in, which is molybdenum 99, it's an isotope that has a daughter product, technetium, which is very useful in medical diagnostics. In fact, there are over 7 million of these procedures done every year in this country. And we've had a real shortage in the last year because the major producer for this country is in Canada. We don't make any of it in the United States. It's sort of a disgrace. But the Canadian reactor was very old and had maintenance problems and was down. And so there was a great shortage of that. The project I've been working on is I believe, a much simpler and safer way of producing this particular isotope. And it is my hobby, I guess, and also my major interest currently. So that's, as I said, I'm working with one of the very small companies here, ENCOR, and we have a contract with the Argonne Laboratory in Chicago. And we are using, as a research tool, a reactor up at the Naval Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland. And my partner is up there today doing an installation for an experiment that we're planning in the next month or so. So I'm very, very much interested in it. I think that it's a great potential. Actually, for Lynchburg, if we establish a reactor here to produce isotopes, it would create a number of jobs, but it would also create a center of excellence in this field of radioisotopes.
Oh, wow.
I personally have had this procedure, perfusion for a heart, and as a result I ended up with a pacemaker, but it's been used within this community thousands of times, and many people have had a great benefit from it, and we need to have it. The Iranians, going back to them, are using it also, you know, and they have this small reactor producing for what we would consider a small quantity of it, but they consider it necessary and very much want this reactor to continue to operate, continue to produce. And this is an opportunity, actually, which, for reasons, I have to blame the Israelis for not being supportive of the idea of providing fuel or help to the Iranians on it. But it would be a marvelous diplomatic opening, I think, and there are other people who do think the same thing. But so far we have made very, very little progress in that.
Yes. And you come from what collective do you come from? What collective?
I'm a graduate of the University of Virginia for PhD.
Okay.
And a graduate of the University of Illinois
Oh, Illinois.
for a master's degree and
In
bachelor's in physics.
in
And
Champaign, Illinois.
did I,
Champaign.
yeah, Champaign-Urbana.
Because I went to University of Illinois.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
In Illinois?
Yeah, in Chicago Circle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we're fellow alumni.
Yes. And I also went to University of Virginia for my
Okay.
bachelor degree.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
see,
for
we are linked.
Mathematics.
Well, this was, of course, I was drafted into the Army in 1945 and stayed long enough, year and a half, that I got tuition and all of the benefits of the GI Bill going to Illinois, and so I just continued on. I started out, actually, before I was drafted, in journalism, and worked for the Daily Illini, maybe remember that paper,
Yes.
and also for the radio station, WILL. But after, in the Army, I got involved also in public relations, and was in the 2nd Infantry Division, and we produced 2 newspapers, a weekly and a monthly, and did pictures and stories about the sports and all of it. And I also spent a lot of time writing speeches for generals. The war ended, and the Army was coming back, and they were very concerned that people would not accept returning soldiers. They'd be afraid of them. And so the Army was very interested in convincing people, you know, that the soldiers returning back were just really civilians returning to civilian life, and so on. So we did a lot of, I remember I established a cooking contest, and as it turned out, one Army cook was the winner of the first prize. So we did a big story on that. But after I got back, I realized I was not a very good journalist, and I enjoyed physics and math, and so at Illinois I went back into physics and mathematics, and worked with a lot of very good people. And when I graduated with a master's degree from Illinois, I went to work in Chicago for a very small company called Nuclear Chicago, and we built instruments of all kinds. And one of my anecdotes is that I had a contract with Enrico Fermi at the University of Chicago for an instrument. Fermi and Marcel Schein became interested in the 50s in cosmic rays, and they were sending up balloons, and they wanted small package detectors of radiation to go with these balloons. And So I worked on the design of that. My story with Fermi is I had a package I was delivering to him at the university, and I was installing it in one of these 19-inch racks, and I was putting it in. I was putting a screw into it. I didn't have the right thing, so I had a dime, and I was screwing the screw in, and Fermi is looking at me, and he goes away, and he comes back, and he gives me a screwdriver. He says, "You must always use the right tool." That's why Fermi said, wonderful man. He died in 1954, but is probably certainly the greatest experimental physicist in our
Yes,
life, in our century.
yes, yes. That was fantastic. And you came here a year after that, you know? You came to Lynchburg a year after that.
Yes,
in
I went
55.
in 1954. I thought the instrument business, was good, but I also had lived in Chicago so long, I was sort of interested in getting out. So I signed up and I went to what was called the Oak Ridge School of Reactor Technology in
Yes.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee. This was a school actually established by Admiral Hyman Rickover. He wanted to train more nuclear engineers. So I went to that school for a year as a scholarship from the Atomic Energy Commission. And when I got out, there were all kinds of companies trying to get into the nuclear business. And so I interviewed with 6 companies
Wow,
when I was ready
yes.
to graduate, and I got an offer from all of them.
Oh. Did you
but
interview with Westinghouse?
I had an offer from Westinghouse. I had to
Yeah.
live in Pittsburgh, which didn't
Yeah.
suit me very well. An offer from American Sheen and Foundry, General Electric,
Yes.
on and on, the American Locomotive Company. Anyway, Babcock and Wilcox, I interviewed, and they had the head of their physics operation, a man named Milton Edlund. And Edlund was a very dynamic person. And he so enthused me that I thought, well, it's important to work for somebody you respect and like. So I joined Babcock and Wilcox and happened to come to Lynchburg because of that.
Yes.
Now Edlund continued to be very dynamic, and he lived just 3 doors down on this block.
Oh.
So I got to know him well. And we built all kinds of nuclear reactor experiments out at Mount Athos. We built the very first commercial experiment out there called CX-1,
Yes.
first licensed facility in the United States, well, in the world, for a commercial plant. And then we went on, we did work in the design of the NS Savannah, nuclear ship Savannah, Army package power reactors. We had a test reactor out there. We had the highest density of nuclear reactors of anywhere in the world out at this little site in Mount Athos, a swimming pool reactor.
Mm.
And if you look around, there are pictures of this and that are my mementos of those days. Edlund eventually left. He went up to VPI. He was replaced by another very senior scientist, William Brazil.
Oh.
And Brazil moved into Edlund's house, as it turned out. But Brazil was the inventor of the swimming pool research reactor
Okay.
at Oak Ridge. And he was the director of the Babcock and Wilcox Research Center. And I worked for him for many years. He died while he was still the director. And we did all kinds of marvelous things, I thought. And I have a lot of great memories and mementos of it. It was the most fun. I don't think most people enjoy working as much as I did. I just loved the job,
That's
the
fantastic.
people, and there was a lot of overseas travel involved. We went to Germany to start up a research reactor there. We went to Italy started up a research reactor there. In Italy, I took my grandmother, who was over 90 years old, because she was born in Italy. And where we were to build this reactor was near Florence, where my father was born.
Wow.
So that was a great adventure. And then we went back to Germany for the startup. We were there for a year and a half for the startup of one of the largest power reactors in the world at Mülheim-Kärlich. And that was a lot of fun. And I was tutored in German. Been tutored in Italian. I love language and had a chance to try them all out. We also had about a year out at the Electric Power Research Institute as a lone employee, where they were developing research tools for the electric utility business. And we moved out, we bought a house in Palo Alto, and
Wow, what a place that is.
yeah, we had a grand, we
I
kept
love
this
Palo
house.
Alto, yeah.
We moved into this house in the late 50s and have lived here really more or less all the time since. But when we went to Germany, went to Italy, went to California, we just leased the house out to people who were essentially just house sitters. Well, as now we always came back. But all of these places were just grand adventures, you know, they're more fun than you can imagine, more than most people deserve, I think.
Thank you for sharing your life experiences and thoughts with us. Thank you for sharing it.
You're welcome.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes.
My name is Joan Jones. I was raised in Rochester, New York, and married a man who was training in New York City. He was a resident in orthopedics. So I lived in New York City for several years, and after that my husband and I moved to Shreveport, Louisiana, where he was lieutenant in the Air Force as a physician. So I have lived far north and far south. And when it came time to make a permanent home for ourselves and our family, we looked for a small-sized city, any place in the United States. And then my husband had classmates here who informed him that they needed an orthopedic surgeon. And so we came to Lynchburg in 1957. We were very fortunate to be enfolded in the community. And since I had not been raised in the South, I was unfamiliar with some conditions that we were to meet. We built a house in Lincoln Forest, where we still live, in a leafy suburb, I guess it was then, and raised 3 children, and really began to participate in community life. Both of us were interested in the community and the resources here, the beauty of a city like this, which still had wonderful woods and trails and great supportive population for city life. And we plunged in. And the first, well, I should tell a story that the first thing that I did politically here was when this area was being developed, and there was not a street that went through from 2 big roads, Langen Road and Link Road. And so all of the lots were being developed for houses. And of course I was interested in where children were going to go to school. So I and several other people started a research, and eventually went to city council and explained to the members that we had this wonderful neighborhood, but we didn't have a school. And so the outcome of the whole effort, which took, I suppose, a year, was that a campus was reserved for what turned out to be an elementary school and a middle school. And that was so gratifying. And for me, that led to being appointed to the school board in 1964, where I served until 1971. Now, Lynchburg had what is at least informally known as a biracial commission. Many years prior to that time. And many of the city fathers had gotten together with our African American citizens, their leaders, and developed this commission to discuss issues which affected both black and white citizens. And I don't remember the link, but it had something to do with the building of the new hospital, which was completed probably in 1958. I regard that commission, on which I remember Jane White's father, Mr. Baber, served. I think Harold Leggett served, and many, many other distinguished members of the community who had such wisdom in getting together, and I really believe that they avoided for our community so many violent situations and problems that other communities in the South experienced. One nemesis was our newspaper. Our newspaper wasn't offensive toward black citizens as much as they were ignored at that time. And for instance, the newspaper refused to publish pictures of black brides, which was very disturbing to the rest of us. And there were many, many incidents where black citizens were not given coverage for their events, and others were, and it was quite unpleasant and quite uncomfortable. So there was another group, maybe some of the same people, who confronted the editor and publisher, and that effort eventually, over a long time period, resulted in better coverage and better treatment of African American citizens in the community, as far as the newspaper is concerned. I guess the thing that I probably experienced the most closely was the integration of the schools. Interestingly, in that era, Lynchburg didn't have school buses. And of course, one instant solution to the separation of the races by school was to bus, but we didn't have buses. So that had to be addressed. Also, there was a problem with maintaining Dunbar High School for African American children, and E.C. Glass High School for white children, because E.C. Glass had been a much heralded and much touted school, and so white citizens did not want to send their children to Dunbar at that time, because E.C. Glass was supposed to be, and is to this day, an outstanding high school. And that created terrible turmoil, not to mention integrating the secondary middle schools and elementary schools. I remember one night when African American citizens came to the school board meeting, which they often did, and surrounded the table where we were discussing these matters. It felt very threatening. It probably wasn't threatening, but at that time, passions were running high, and we did have an African American member of the school board at that time, and it was a very difficult experience for him as well. I'm really proud to have served on the school board at that time. I never resigned, others did. I just felt that once we had gotten into these issues, we had to stay and try to solve them. And of course, eventually we did. It took a long time, long after my term ended in 1971. I went to the state legislature in 1974, and my primary interest in going was in education, expenditures for education, and so forth. I was also interested in corrections, health and welfare, women's issues, and a whole string of other things, but education was my primary focus. And of course I was keeping a very close eye on the Lynchburg public schools and how well they were progressing. Improving curriculum, improving physical plant, and I'm to this day very proud of EC Glass and of Heritage as well. We had to close Dunbar School, and that was very painful and very difficult, a very difficult decision. But I think the outcome has been quite positive, and I know that African American citizens in our community gather in many places now, in lieu of gathering at Dunbar, which was their social center. Well, one thing that I remember in Lynchburg was that there was downtown, Main Street, and it was very much the focal center of the city, unlike today where we have many neighborhoods, many gathering places outside of downtown. And we had there Patterson's drugstore, which had a lunch counter. And we had students, African American students, and Randolph College students who colluded and decided to sit in together at the Patterson drugstore. And that was flabbergasting to the owners of the drugstore and very disturbing to other people. Police were called, and students may have spent an overnight in jail, I'm not sure. I think that's the case. It was shocking because it was a very overt act in which white students participated. And that was the talk of the town for a long, long time. It seems so ironic today, where we have a city with many, many African American citizens who enjoy the same pursuits, the same restaurants, the same arts, and so forth as the other citizens. And to think that there was a time when they were not permitted to come into a restaurant that was owned by a white owner and patronized by white citizens is a really shocking thing.
Do you remember any time, like, what was it like in those restaurants that they couldn't come?
Well, there weren't many restaurants. I know that the African American students, citizens, had their own restaurants in their neighborhoods, and I suppose we had a restaurant at the hotel downtown, which was the primary gathering place on Sunday and so forth, but I can't remember very many places where we could go, and certainly the students didn't have many places to go off campus, Randolph students. No, I don't remember. I don't remember other restaurants. We didn't have Boonesboro, we didn't have, the trolley line stopped at Randolph College, and while the trolley line had long been abandoned by the time I moved to Lynchburg, there was still kind of a divide there, and the rest of the city has boomed since, I suppose, World War II, but no more trolley line. The tracks were taken up.
Do you remember other stories of what happened during that time? Like, I was told by what happened to the pool.
To the...
Some swimming pools and...
Oh, the swimming pool, yeah. Yeah, I do remember that. The swimming pool in Riverside Park. I lived near Riverside Park with my family when I moved to Lynchburg, and the African American citizens did bring their children over to swim, and that just upset white citizens so much that the city closed all the pools that summer. I can't remember which summer it is, but maybe you can insert that. Let's see, I can remember. It was the summer of 1957, because that was the 1 year that we lived in that house, and then we built this house. Or 1958, at any rate. It was a real disappointment to the children, because it was such a wonderful recreational activity, but the white citizens generally just insisted that the pool be closed, and all the pools were closed. So that was when Kumbaya was developed, and it was to provide a place for black and white children to swim together. And that, of course, that's a whole nother story that I don't know as well as many people do, but it's the story of the Cosby family and how their spirit contributed so much to the integration of the city.
The Cosby family?
Cosby family.
Who are they?
Bev Cosby was a minister there.
Okay.
At the Church of the Covenant. And they developed a camp, interracial camp. And many of us sent our children there on a daily basis during the summer.
Yes.
It was one of the model projects that developed through integration, and it is still thriving. It's a beautiful location out there on Boonesboro Road. But the whole Cosby family was a pioneering family in that effort.
I heard about Mr. Cosby, but nobody referred Cosby family, so I was like, who? But I remember now that I heard their name.
Yes.
From other people who have been interviewed.
Well, Jack was the president of the American Federal Savings and Loan, and Bev was the minister out there, and then they have a brother who is a minister in Washington. I think he's deceased. But they were a native family, and they had such wonderful philanthropic and racial attitudes, and they contributed a great deal to the progress of the city on that score. And I'm sure that their church was integrated too.
So the pools were closed only for one summer.
No, they weren't. That was when they started to be closed. I think they were closed for quite a while.
Do you know how long?
I don't.
Mm.
I don't. But some of the other neighborhoods developed pools, but that still didn't serve black children, except for Kumbaya. So.
I wasn't here at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I came here after that to the U.S. Why do
Well,
you think?
one thing I would say about Lynchburg, there has been a strong public school tradition here, and it's very deep-rooted. Being a teacher has been a very respectable career, and Lynchburg has always sought well-trained teachers, and to some extent, the whole level of the city has been raised by the schools being integrated, because some of the African American teachers who came to Glass from Dunbar were not as well trained, and they had the potential, and the city just set about training them. And I think one of the reasons that we had such an less eventful time over integrating the schools than a place like Farmville is that there was a real effort on the part of the school board and the city council to draw the two races together over education. And to this day, there's a strong educational component in the community that's backed by legions of citizens. I think it's very significant. And unlike Farmville, Prince Edward County, where they closed the schools, just such a terrible, it was a tragedy, a terrible thing to do to children.
So Lynchburg, they were more successful.
Oh, definitely.
And you said earlier that the success had to do with this group of people.
I think so. I think it had a lot to do with the early establishment of a biracial commission which assured African American citizens that there were a large number of people in the community who wanted to include them and wanted to provide the same services for them, and just generally to create a better situation.
You know, you're from the north.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little about the difference that you saw from the north and the south?
Well, people in the north don't talk about the Civil War very much. I have to say that. I was surprised when I moved down here. I knew about the Civil War. I had studied American history. But it certainly had a different role in the north than it does in the south, even now, 50 years later or more.
Could you expand on that? Like
Well,
the differences and what you saw that surprised you?
Well, you know, I didn't know what a reenactment was. But there are still reenactments of Civil War battles, which are living history. And I have respect for the people who wish to participate in those. But I didn't really understand the ramifications of the Civil War until I moved to the South. And of course, it's a huge recognition of the suffering that the invaded nation experiences. And the invaders have an entirely different outlook. But actually, when we lived in New York, of course it was a melting pot. and we became very used to that environment. And that was in the early 50s, and there were many physicians at the hospital where my husband was trained from foreign countries and from the South, and it was a very diverse experience and an excellent experience for us. So we expected to encounter that. When we lived in Shreveport, we lived on the Air Force Base, so we didn't really experience the community there the way we did when we moved to Lynchburg. And
so what did you experience when you came here with regard to that?
well, we felt more open to the African American people than they felt towards us. And that was a little unusual for us. And we had African American friends in New York, and friends from India and Pakistan and so forth. And so that startled us. Even my husband, who was a graduate of the University of Virginia, was surprised that some of our gestures were rebuffed. African Americans did not participate in the life of the community to the extent they do now. And I always regretted that. Thought that was unfortunate. So that probably the only experience that our children had with their children was in school and through athletics too. We had a son who played football in the 70s and at EC Glass, and he was colorblind. He had friends who were black and white, and we had parties here, and they came, and it was really wonderful. And I wouldn't take anything for those opportunities. Well, I think the barriers are falling. My personal opinion is that every group may choose to be only with their own group. And I'm not sure that beyond being fair and giving everyone an equal opportunity, which is what I endorse completely, I'm not sure that we can expect people to mix totally, either north or south, because they have that choice. And I think that, in a way, I'll say that has affected the integration of the churches. There are churches that are integrated, and both races are comfortable there, and other races as well. But I don't think that you can force that. I think you can make the opportunity available, and perhaps it will happen, but generally people like to be with their own kind. And it's kind of like the way animals are. You know, animals like to be with their own kind, and I think we're the same way to some extent. It is more stimulating and more fulfilling to me to know people of different color. But they may not feel the same, you know, and that's just it's a human situation that exists. In the North, people are traditionally just so far removed from the neighborhoods where there are other races. In big cities all over this country, people live in the suburbs, and there are integrated suburbs, and suburban Washington is certainly a great example of that. But in Rochester, where I lived, there are still many, many, many suburbs that are totally white. And that's the function of a big city somehow. That may change, and it is changing, I suppose, some places, but it's not a general thing. There were so many uneducated blacks in the South in those days, in the days of slavery. And when you consider how the North was settled by the Northern Europeans, there's just a huge culture difference. I think that's an
Or
issue.
between the North and the South?
Oh yes, I think so.
Could you talk a little about each one, what is it like, each one,
Well,
and how they're different?
the average slave holder in the South did not educate the slaves. So there came a developing population of illiterate people, whereas in the North, people came and began to establish schools, and not only elementary and high schools, but of course Harvard College and Yale and other universities which were established early on. And I think that there was that big difference, a big educational difference, and I don't know how that gap could be forded very quickly.
Oh, okay.
Of course, I think we're making a wonderful effort toward doing that now, and I think our educational levels are quite remarkable, but that's a fairly recent phenomenon. And if you consider how recent the Civil War really was, and it takes so many generations for people to live up to their potential, have the opportunity to live up to their potential. And I just think we've made amazing strides in that regard.
You know Dr. Quillian?
Yes?
Yeah, I interviewed him a month ago. I interviewed him a month ago.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And he said some interesting things. And at the end of his interview, he made a comment, but it was the end of interview and he didn't expand on it.
Oh.
And he said, we have a long way to go, and that these racial differences and conflicts, in his opinion, have not really been resolved, and that we have a long way to go, he said.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was the end of the interview.
Oh. Well, we have a long way to go because we still have a lot of white people who are not educated as well as they could be or should be. And they're competing with African Americans for jobs. And I think that our charge is to bring everybody up. I think we're doing a much better job with handicapped people now than we did 50 years ago. There are wonderful services available, and they're getting the education that they can handle, and their needs are being met. But as far as the lowest level of our society, which we want to see educated for employment, it isn't happening everywhere, and for lots of reasons. And probably, one cliche is that some of those people can make more money selling drugs than they can taking a job. And that's black and white, and it's not limited to any one race by any means. So I think that drugs have an effect in our society, but it's the desire for education is instilled by the family, and I think we're just reaching out to families at all levels and trying to convince them that the way to close the gap between haves and have-not of any color is with education, and the desire for it, education and training in many different venues and in different ways, and meeting people where they are, whether it's the library or a street corner or whatever. We just have a long way to go. We can't get everybody into a classroom, but there are ways to. And these community centers are wonderful, after-school programs and all that. So I feel progress is being made, and I would agree with Dr. Quillian, we still have a long way to go. Many African Americans are more comfortable with their own people, and I don't regard that as unnatural. I think it's probably very natural.
But like I come from Iran, and but I lived in many countries,
Mm-hmm.
and so my inclusion parameters over the years have changed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that once upon a time I was more comfortable with the Persians. And then I became more comfortable with the French.
Uh-huh.
Then I became more comfortable with the Brazilians. Then I became more,
Yeah.
In other words, the circle of inclusion expanded
Mm-hmm.
slowly over the
Mhm.
years. And so that it came to a point that I saw people as humans.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And
Well-
so it's like I understand that what you're saying, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
However, it all depends of the circle of inclusion, how it gets expanded.
Yes, exactly. And some people don't have the opportunity to be in a situation where they do expand.
Yes.
And if they're comfortable and confident with the people they do know
Yes.
in their race or in another race or nationality, I think that's fine. I don't think we should confuse social gathering with equal rights. I'm very strong for equal rights for everybody, equal opportunity for everybody. And that's why education's so important,
Yes.
because it is available to everybody, and so the challenge really is to help people to understand how it will benefit them.
Yes.
And we have so many wonderful examples in Lynchburg, and have had, not enough, but there have been so many high-achieving people here who have made the most of their abilities. Well, we have a lot of barriers to break down in this
Yeah.
country.
And I guess the whole reason for filming is nice because people don't get a chance to really talk to each other and hear different opinions out there
Mm-hmm.
and the different feelings that exist.
Well, I think the opportunity for that is greater in a small city than it is in a big city, because people do get sort of fenced off in bigger places, and they just depend on their little neighborhood or whatever.
Yeah, I see. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's true. When we lived in New York, we lived in Little Italy.
Okay.
So we were surrounded by first-generation Italians, and it was a remarkable experience. I mean, we got to be their friends, they got to be our friends, and they were the only people who lived in that neighborhood besides us. It was fascinating.
What is your collective? what collective do you belong to?
German and English.
Okay.
Hmm. And yeah.
So your family came here long time ago.
Yes. Hmm. Long time ago.
Have you like studied the genealogy?
Some.
Yes.
We have a person in our family who does it. Well, I think it's very interesting. And of course, I love seeing the same characteristics repeated in our grandchildren that I've
Yes.
seen in my parents and so forth.
And your husband, he was from what collective?
He was from Wales.
Oh, Wales.
Mostly Wales. Hmm.
Yeah, I love Wales people.
Yeah. Yes, they're lovely.
They're so handsome.
Yes, they really are.